Monday, March 2nd. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A and Section 20, I'm hereby informing all attendees that a video and audio recording is being made of the meeting. As promised, second item of business, we have public comment. Anybody from the public who might have something to say, questions, whatever? Hearing none, moving on.
I have something I would like to submit as evidence.
If you could just step up to the stand and identify yourself.
David Duvall,
Yeah.
620 Stockbridge Road.
Yeah.
So I went to get my fishing and hunting license, and when I stopped at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they have this on the counter explaining about PCBs and how it affects wildlife and children and everybody else. I'd like to submit this as evidence.
Okay, we can bring it right up to the table here. We'll give it to Sabrina to log in.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dave. Is there any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll move on. Approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Wonder if we have them here.
All the way at the end, so
All the way at the end, yeah.
the last 2 pages.
Oh, yes, yeah. That was from February 13th, was it?
I'll move that they be approved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve in a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous vote. And moving on to the main order of business, the committee discussion, Q&A with EPA representatives. I'll start off by saying, as the chair, there are certain well-established facts which I would prefer not to go in tonight because we have until 7:30 tonight to ask questions, get questions answered, to get a better understanding of where we stand today in terms of the proposed UDF. It's been well established that the people of the town of Lee are very unhappy, do not want this done at all. And it's been well established that we feel we've been used and abused, that it's been an unfair process, that the permit should never have been issued given the structure of the negotiations. It's all been established. And between town meetings where there were town reps, open town meetings, measures on the ballot, overwhelmingly, and round figures, about 70% of the voters are opposed to this project. I'm just putting that on the table. So we already know that. The reason we're here tonight, these folks have come a long distance from the EP, they're with the EPA. So Sabrina, thank you for all the name tags. I was going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, but great job. We're here to ask questions to get a better understanding of where we are today and where we may be going. Okay, so this is an informational hearing, and that's why we're here. Not to complain about the situation, not to go on and on and on about how bad the situation is. That's been established. So that being said, Josh, do you have any sort of opening statement that you wanted to make, or?
Yeah, I would just like to send our appreciation for the invitation. I know I spoke with several of you at the open house that we had in December on the UDF construction, and there was some expression of wanting to come and have us join one of these meetings and share information and have an open dialogue. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I hope this isn't our only discussion. We're more than happy to continue discussions in the future. There's one new face around the table, well, maybe not new face for some, but I did invite Brian Olson, who is our director of the Superfund section, to be here to help answer any questions if there's specifics regarding the agency and making sure that we have the staff and workforce to continue the work that we're doing specifically at this site. Brad, do you want to add anything?
I'll just add that I'm not new to here. I was a 24-year-old project manager in Pittsfield for EPA back when the project first started, and we started finding all this contamination in people's yards and oil bubbling out of the river and the Housatonic up in Pittsfield and everything. So I've been involved in this for like 34 years. I do really care about this community and the site. I know not everyone agrees with some of the decisions that we've made. But we've, as you said, we've gone back and forth on that a bunch of times. Happy to answer any questions on the gentleman that left the flyer there. I think they've had similar flyers to that in the past. That's one of the reasons why we want to clean up the site, because without doing anything, we're going to continue to not be able to do any kind of recreational fishing, bird hunting, that sort of thing out here because of the PCBs. So that's one thing that eventually will go away once we do the cleanup. So, but I'd love to be able to answer questions, be as open as possible to you. Thank you for having us up here. It's really, I'm glad Josh let me come out here this time, keep asking. Chris knows I've been out here in the past, but.
And we did send a list of questions ahead, which I think everyone saw, hopefully in the email as well. There's some responses that we have ahead of time. But just let you know that those are all in this packet. If you need to refer to them, the committee members have that response starting on page 2. So.
Yeah, we understood there was a lot of topics that we wanted to touch upon, so we wanted to prepare some summary information. By no means do any of our responses limit the discussion tonight. If there's additional questions, would like more information about any of the responses, or if you would like us to just go over the responses, we can also do that.
Okay. Would somebody like to start with a question?
Yeah, I'll
Robert?
So, Brian, you're CERCLA for Region 1?
Yes, yeah, for New England, the head of the Superfund Emergency Response Program for New England.
Oh, okay. How many projects, just out of curiosity, do you have?
About 125. Some are all in different stages of either completed or, at the very beginning. We have a couple of sites that we just put on the national priorities list a couple of years ago, the Neponset River being the biggest one.
Yeah. Post-industrial legacy, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So for the, this is just a generic question, because one of the things that intrigues me is the relationship between EPA and GE, which is laid out in the permit, which I actually read the entire thing. In that permit, and as Dean liked to say, this will never change. This is what we're doing. This is the law of the land now. Under what conditions do these CERCLA permits get tested or get opened up and changed?
Well, John can go into details. He's the lawyer. He'll kick me if I say anything wrong, but I will say.
I'm not looking for a strategy. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
This is because I have an environmental geochemistry background, and I think there could be opportunities.
Yeah, I think for the most part, and not even just talking about this particular situation, but anytime we have one of these types of agreements, they really change with completely new information, that we didn't know about before.
Things we did, yeah.
Right, that we didn't consider before. And in this particular permit, when we issued, we knew more when we issued this particular permit than back in 2000 when we had the initial consent decree. And we changed things over time. I will say that even without changing the permit, we've changed the direction and where we're going. I mean, Dean's retired. He is right that the basic permit won't change, but I'll give you an example of something that did change, and I'll give you all credit for that. We initially were going to basically use trucks to move the material around throughout Berkshire County. And you all rose up and said, no, we're not, there's gotta be a better way to do this. So we got together with GE, they weren't happy about it necessarily, they didn't feel like it was the best way to do things or the cheapest way to do things. But we worked with them to change the approach, which is now, a high percentage of the material is going directly to the UDF instead of taking it by trucks. And then another percentage that we weren't doing before is going to come by rail. So we don't want to put as many trucks on, very few trucks on the road compared to our initial plan. And that's because of you all's comments. We could, every site, we generally drive trucks back and forth, of the 100 whatever sites that I've worked on, there's a lot of truck traffic generally. And this was a good idea, I think. If there was a better way to do it, we do it, and if the rail doesn't work out perfectly, we'll adjust then, but I think that will work. I think the pumping's gonna work really well, but if it doesn't work, we'll adjust, So I do think things change over time, but the legal framework won't change.
So Brian, to follow up on that, more generally, the permit establishes performance standards, like cleanup
Yes.
levels, for example.
Yeah.
And then it has corrective measures. So I think one way to think about it is that the performance standards are very difficult to change, most likely won't change.
Okay, that's helpful.
But how that gets done, like trucks versus rail, can change. And we have the permit that sets forth the performance standards and requires many technical submittals from GE that detail how the things get done, how the cleanup gets done, how those performance standards are met. And those are more changeable, more adjustable.
And the
GE has to meet the performance standards. If they
Right.
don't, they have to adjust their way of doing things.
To also add when the project's done, say we finish the final reach, the UDF has been closed, it's done. It doesn't mean the project's done. A part of the permit is that periodic reviews have to occur on a minimum every 5 years to evaluate the effectiveness of the remedy. That's where EPA will require GE to go collect additional samples, do monitoring. It's a huge, long process, and during that evaluation, if it is determined that human health and the environment is not protected, EPA will identify corrective measures to protect human health.
That GE would be on the hook to.
Correct. And those happen every 5 years, so that time actually started when we began the site prep. So the first periodic review is actually due in 2030. So not everything is going to be completed, obviously, or a lot of things haven't even started at that point, but those periodic reviews continue throughout the life of the project, even if we haven't achieved completion yet.
And just one other question, you can probably answer this one about the relationship with GE. Are you talking to GE that are on GE payroll, or you're talking to their their subcontractors, both?
So it is both.
They're
The agents.
just rocket ships, they're not into.
So GE does have a environmental group that takes care of these types of sites. We all know that their history of the site and the work they've done.
Okay.
They do have internal project managers that run the cleanups for GE. They then also retain contractors such as construction, environmental, whoever, to help implement the remedy and the work that we require. So we do work with both, but the agency also can't instruct GE contractors.
No.
So we tell GE what to do. So if you ever see like a report that comes in and it's from Arcadis or any of their contractors,
Yeah.
our letters will always be GE shall. We're never instructing anybody but GE to do any corrective measures, address any issues, revise reports. GE is on the hook for all of this work.
Another issue on the relationship between us and GE is, you mentioned the GE Aerospace, they make rocket ships, right? So, and they split up into 3 entities. Just around the time we were doing this agreement, we had, and especially our lawyers, had major concerns about, well, what happens now? We have this agreement with them, and they're splitting up into 3 entities, how's it gonna work? And so we had some pretty spirited back and forth with GE over that issue. They thought it was obvious, oh, they're gonna be, on the hook for this, and we didn't think it was 100% obvious, so we made sure that we reached an agreement that made it very obvious that whether it was GE Aerospace or GE, whatever their other things are, for Nova, whatever it was, whoever took their liability, and Aerospace took the liability for a bunch of Superfund sites too, so they have a whole group of people that are working on environmental issues, even though they're GE Aerospace. So that's who we deal with, but we were concerned about that. That's another thing that the public brought to us when everyone was concerned about that. It wasn't just us, there were other people in the public that questioned that, like what happens when GE splits apart? Are they gonna walk away,
The consent, for people who don't know me, I'm John Kilborn, I'm a site attorney. I've been working with this site, not as long as Brian, but almost 30 years, mostly doing work in the plant area, but with Tim's retirement, I took over the rest of River, the entire site. As to this split up of the spin-offs of GE, we believe the consent decree, which is like a contract, clearly holds the spin-off entities liable as a backstop for the performance. Right now, GE is still the company. They do business as GE Aerospace. They are performing. If for some reason they didn't perform, we would go after the entities that they spun off and say, well, you've got to step up. That's what you agreed to in the consent decree. And the language is clear on that.
To expand on that comment, what sort of recourse do you have? You mentioned you have to step up. What does that mean? Are there, legal mechanisms, fines? Are there cease and desist kind of things? It may depend on the problem, but that's something that's come up repeatedly. Is that what sort of recourse do you have? And in a way, it comes up. What sort of recourse do we have if we see things that are not being complied with?
Okay.
We have almost everything that you mentioned. We have the ability to do. And one additional thing is, and I don't remember the exact amount, but we have financial assurance from GE, so that if they stop performing, we have access to a fund.
It's a
$150 million. So to the extent that we're going through, if we have to go through some sort of litigation with them, we have the ability to access this fund to keep the project moving as we go through that. So, I mean, we don't anticipate this happening. My sense is when GE agrees to do something, they do a pretty good job at it, right? But if that happens, we have that ability to go after that fund as well, in addition to the other recourse that we have.
So to flesh that out a little bit, in 2000 we entered a consent decree with General Electric Company and other entities, other Connecticut and Massachusetts, which was approved by the court. A consent decree settles claims of the government. So when we brought, we told GE, well, you've got to do the cleanup. If you don't do the cleanup, well, we issued orders to do certain parts of the cleanup, and so then we entered into an overall agreement for the cleanup of Pittsfield and the river, the rest of river. So we came to an agreement on GE on how to clean up. That was put into this consent decree agreement, and that was approved by the court after a public comment and notice. So in 2000 we have this consent decree, which is like a contract. So if GE violates that, first we would let them know, and there's various stages of elevation, but we have They agreed to stipulated penalties, so if they didn't perform, one of the first things we could do is we could assess stipulated penalties of damages under the consent decree. And then we could go into court and seek to recover those stipulated penalties and force GE to correct whatever needs to be corrected. We also have the ability to take over the work ourselves if GE does not perform. We have the ability, Brian mentioned, for the performance bond. So we have, and we've been overseeing GE since the 93 or 95, doing this work in the cleanup so far. So.
I'm an engineer, by the way. John gets nervous when I talk about legal.
But he's
I was involved in these negotiations back in 2000 as well, so.
It also is important to know what they're being held to, correct? So there's a lot of information. We have the permit, we have the settlement agreement, we have all of these documents. Well, we keep adding to those. Anytime EPA approves of a report that has requirements that GE must meet, those are new performance standards that they have to achieve. So for instance, the conceptual design, the final design for the UDF, or the forthcoming REACH 5A final design. Once those are approved, those set the performance standards GE must meet. And if they do not meet those, that's where EPA has the enforcement action that we can move forward with as needed.
What Bob was saying, we get some really kind of simple questions sometimes that we don't know how to answer, like, what if somebody sees a truck loaded with PCB sediment on the road a road that was listed as one that they're not supposed to use for that, recourse like that comes up a lot. A lot of people have a hard time, looking at all of the scientific details of this, but they can relate to things, easily like that. And so what happens in something simple like that when I get a phone call saying, oh, they're trekking down past Lee High School with because some contractor decided it was easier, what sort of recourse for something, I guess an easier question like that happens.
Yeah.
But,
Those things happen too. We're not saying that things don't happen. We have, down in Connecticut, we have a site called Raymark. It's the old brake manufacturing company. It's asbestos and everything. And we had hundreds of trucks moving around in that town, and we had specific performance standards for the trucks, how they were going to be covered. Asbestos, you don't want that flying around. That is worse than PCBs flying around in the air. So we had, and we got a call from someone in the town government saying, hey, there's a truck out there. So we took action right away. They were our contractors. They weren't, it was a federal government lead site. So we took action against the contractors, did what we needed to do, and we eventually created a video explaining to the public, hey, you were right. This was the truck. This is what they were supposed to be doing. They weren't doing it. We will make sure it never happens again. So things happen. So we want to hear if something does go wrong, and we can fix it,
So when I call Josh and Olivia.
There's a couple aspects that are ways you can, of course, reach out and let us know about this. First of all, give me a phone call. Give Olivia a phone call. If it's something urgent, if it's anything else, you have our emails, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we'll continue to do those. And if you feel that we need to have those meetings more frequently, we can definitely ramp those up as work begins and moves forward. Also on GE's website, so they have a project-specific website that was a requirement for them to create and publish, and it's posting some of the quality of life data. There is a Contact Us Now feature that goes to their community involvement. They are required to monitor those and get back to notify EPA, and then also address and resolve the issues pending whatever it is. So there's multiple ways. You can contact GE through that method. Of course, Olivia and I are always available. And then if there's anything urgent, you have my phone, and I can leave my business card for everybody if there's something that happens. There's when I look at it, it's more than just EPA oversight for these types of projects. There's also a level of community oversight. I would love to be everywhere and see everything, but if something is seen, or if you get a question from a resident and you don't have the answer, you can always forward those folks to us as well.
Yeah, I'll even, just one, I would say that if it's something that GE has agreed to, and it's part of a plan, and they're required to do it, and their contractor does something differently, frankly, they'd be pissed and they'd want to know about it too, so that they could have it addressed, so.
I would say, but I would urge the town to contact EPA also, because if there's something going on, we want to know about it as soon as possible, so we can find out what's going on, get the evidence, get the facts, so, that's what I
It's
would
in
recommend.
GE's best interest that their contractors are doing the work appropriately and to the performance standards set in their documents. Otherwise, they're the ones that are overall liable for the work.
So in that same vein of GE subcontractors, does the EPA have any role in vetting their subcontractors? I mean, I know you deal with them on projects in the past and that sort of thing. So how does all that work?
Yeah, so we don't directly approve the subcontractors. When we receive the construction supplemental information package, so the one that just came out is the UDF construction. In that document, it has the expertise and information associated with those contractors. We do review that when we're doing those reviews, and when we provide the overall approval of one of those SIPs, you would indirectly be approving that subcontractor as well.
Okay.
I have a
We would let
question
them know
for
if
you.
we weren't happy about the subcontract. We deal with it's a pretty small community of contractors that do all this kind of work, so we pretty much know a lot of contractors that are doing this work.
What's the turnaround rate, projected if there is a complaint?
It should be pretty immediate.
Yeah, there is a reporting requirement GE has. It's an anecdote, but I'll share it. We were notified by Chris that there was one of GE's contractors that wasn't the nicest coming into the town hall to try to obtain a permit. Well, I brought those complaints to GE, and they went to their contractor and pretty much told them to cut it out. And I haven't heard of any new issues with that specific contractor. They were doing the site prep, but if it does continue, let us know. And that is, again, one of the fastest and best ways is to notify us if there is an issue. And it's something that Olivia and I and the rest of the team can jump on very quickly.
I call people immediately. I hear something on any site from the community, I call that minute. It's like, that's the priority right then, and I expect, in this instance, GE to get right back to me, within that half day, if you will, and with, what are you gonna do, how are you gonna deal with this? Like, that's not something that we would accept for any, period of time.
I have a question for you, sort of on this same subject. I was a contractor for many years as well, and most of the people I worked with are pretty good, but there are always going to be contractors who are looking to cut corners. And we know there are performance standards, and we know there are legal standards being held to. Could you possibly describe to us the role the EPA will play on the site? Will you be there every day? Will you be testing every day, or every week, or every month? How many people will be on site overseeing the contractors, or overseeing, however you oversee things, overseeing GE? Could you describe EPA's role in that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we are the overall decision makers for the site. We outlined the specifics of that in the response, but on a day-to-day, when it comes to construction, it depends on the activity. For instance, the site preparation work that's going on right now, tree cutting and that type of stuff doesn't require full-time oversight. When it comes to liner installation, the topography requirements for the UDF, when we get into the actual rivers of what's being removed and achieving those depths, that's stuff that is going to require pretty full-time oversight. EPA also contracts a local firm that provides oversight on our behalf, and we have direct communication with them as needed. We will be ramping up our ground game. We'll be out here a lot more frequently, especially as work is occurring and beginning. EPA will have a construction trailer at the UDF throughout the life of the project. So we will have a presence, and we will be there for the significant performance standards and requirements of meeting those. Will we be standing on the streets, walking the streets, looking at trucks going by? That's not something that is feasible if we're also trying to look at the other areas. Brian, you can tell me if this is right or wrong, the largest Superfund case team. So there's the 4 project managers, which is myself, Rich, Alex, and Lisa. We have Olivia, who is our full-time CIC for the site. We have John, who is our attorney that has been on the site for 30 years, and he gets frequent phone calls from me. And then we have our contractors, who are 4 people local, but they have expertise in a plethora of different technical areas, and they will bring in field experts to help provide some of that oversight. For instance, when we're doing some of the cultural resource or the rare species surveys, we would have experts in those areas to come provide oversight to ensure we're identifying everything that needs to be identified.
Yeah, when they're doing things like laying liner and sort of like
Welding the seams.
right, and doing all the testing, we're going to be right there. And frankly, GE is okay with that because they don't want, if there's a problem, if we're going to make a problem of something, they want to know right away so that they don't keep moving along, and then we have them undo things and all of that. So, I mean, it's going to be some pretty heavy, intensive oversight, which is why we're going to have the trailer there, and we're going to have a number of staff people that'll be, present there and taking, when they're doing like just major earthwork, probably not so much because it doesn't change, every half day. So, I'm sorry, you were gonna...
I was just wondering, are you going to be taking videos of their work, or is it just going to be you're standing there watching?
Well, it's typical that we would take lots of photos. That's kind of, any kind of field work involves usually a lot of photo documentation. I hadn't really thought about video.
That site that I was talking about down in Connecticut, at Stratford, Connecticut, we had a full-time camera going all the time, and people could log on and watch the work going on. We could think about doing something like that.
That would be good.
That was a landfill too. We were building a landfill there. A lot of times it was kind of boring, but there were at times there was a lot of activity going on. For me, being in Boston, it was good to just say, yeah, look, see, things are moving, especially where the contractors are working for us at that site. I will say that, and Josh is right, this is the biggest oversight team we have in New England. And one of the reasons we're able to do that, and I think this is important, when we reached the agreement with GE back in 2000, we specified that we wanted them to pay us back for all our oversight that we were doing on this project. And our lawyers were smart enough to be able to separate out like costs of litigation versus costs, because they sued us at one point, right? And we didn't, and we had maximum amounts for oversight that we get back for oversight. So that would have been all gone if we didn't have separate litigation costs, and those, they had to pay us 100% of those, and with no maximum amount at all. So I think right now, we put the money into what we call a special account, and it's special for this site only. And right now, let's say we have about $4 million in a special account, which is a lot of oversight money. GE will be billed another few $1 million from us over the last few years. And then we still have, I think, I don't know what's the number, the difference between that and the maximum. It's a lot still. It's like we probably have $20 million altogether, which over the course of this project is a lot. It's a lot of oversight money. We're going to want to really ramp up, especially in the first 4 or 5 years to make sure we're doing it all exactly correctly. And then we'll see how GE is doing, but it's by far the biggest oversight of any project in New England.
Is this one of the bigger projects in New England?
One of them, yeah. I mean, New Bedford Harbor, I will say, New Bedford Harbor, when we were doing that at its height, it's not at its height now. When we were doing that at its height, it has similar oversight to this. We had the Army Corps of Engineers there, we had offices there, we had a few project managers there. No more than this one though. We've been going at this for a while, you know, including the Pittsfield stuff.
That was PCBs as well, New Bedford.
Yeah. So that's a combination of we're burying the PCBs under the harbor, basically, at New Bedford Harbor.
You do mine, you're lining.
There is no liner there because it's below the harbor. It's like, it's buried 20 feet below the harbor, which is a lot of navigational dredging work is done that way. That's how you dispose of navigational dredging materials. So we did that in the harbor in conjunction with the navigational dredging that the Corps was already doing.
Dave?
Oh, sorry.
Dave, you have a comment?
This is about the actual work. You mentioned changes that were made, like using the rail, going to the rail, but you're relying mainly on the slurries, the hydraulic pump. So the hydraulic pump system, the slurry, you generate 2,000 gallons of water for every 1 yard of material that's yielded from that process. Now that's going to accumulate to about well over 1 billion gallons of water that has to, in the dewatering process. Did you ever think of draining Woods Pond? I mean, I've seen Rising Pond completely drained, no water except a stream growing through it. I think I don't have the exact depths of the pond and so forth, it's hard to calculate exactly how much water would be eliminated from the dewatering process just by draining the pond. I'm going to guess over 100 million gallons. I don't know, but the dewatering process is a major part of the overall work. I would think it would be reasonable to look at this job from the point of view of draining the pond, then you can bail it with a long reach excavator, just like they're doing in Pittsfield. Right now, I mean, they're kind of wrapping it up there now, but bailing with one of those machines with a 5-foot bucket on it, you can sure do a lot faster.
Brian, the way I would put that is, you know, that they need to meet performance standards, and I would put that under the means and methods of how you're going to meet the performance standards. So as far as they would have gone through and evaluated what they think are the most effective ways to do this, and provided they give us work plans and demonstrate that this can meet the performance standards, frankly, that's how I would evaluate the methodology. I don't know if, Brian, if you'd say something different.
Yeah, I mean, it's an engineering issue. I think you could do it. You would still have to treat the water that you're taking out of Woods Pond. The Woods Pond water is contaminated.
Well, no, the water just simply be drained down the river.
Well, you'd be letting contaminated water run down the river then.
What's that?
If you're draining it relatively quickly, you'd be letting contaminated water run down the river.
Not only that,
Instead of skimming off the top of the water like going over the dam now. I mean, it's an engineering problem. The other thing I will say is that when we first talked about doing this remediation, there were experts that came in from outside that said the biggest risk as far as they were concerned was not the landfill itself, but was what during the excavation. And if you dewater the whole thing and just let the volatilization happen in those, you know, whatever, a couple 100,000, 300, 400,000 cubic yards of sediments, it's going to create more contamination in the air than doing it the way we're doing it. I mean, if GE wants to treat the water, I think it's better for the community to have them do it that way. Let's put it that way, because I think there's just less chance that there's gonna be any volatilization at all. And I think the volatilization is minimal, but there will be none when we have a pipe like that coming right out of the bottom. The sediments are gonna be wet, yeah, but it's a slurry, and it's, that number sounded high to me, the water, but maybe that's correct.
A billion?
Well, the amount per cubic yard seemed like a lot to me. But we've done this at New Bedford Harbor. That's how we remove the material from New Bedford Harbor by hydraulic dredge.
Yeah.
We bring it to a dewatering facility, same exact thing, treat the water, completely clean water going back into New Bedford Harbor, you know, and the same thing will happen here. That water, even though it's a lot, it's gonna go right back into the Housatonic River, completely cleaned.
After treatment,
Well, in the Bedford Harbor, they were getting a pretty good result from the dewatering process. They were claiming roughly 10% of the material that was slurry was the mud and so forth. But that still leaves 90%. That was the water that had to be dewatered. And
Well, it's treated, it's treated. The water is treated through like a drinking water treatment system, basically, activated carbon, whatever. The water goes through there, it's treated, it concentrates on the carbon, and eventually we have clean water coming out the other end. You have whatever the PCBs are that are left on the sediments, if there are any sediments there. When it's dewatered, there shouldn't be a lot of sediments, so it's just basically, and one thing that dewatering actually does, it's minimal, but it's treating too. If there are any PCBs in that water, it's no longer going into the landfill, you know, so because you're treating that water. So it's actually, well, it is. I mean, people are worried about water coming out of the landfill. We're calling it leachate, it's basically the water, right? It's contaminated with PCBs. If we treat that water before it comes in, none of it's gonna go into the land. None of that PCB contaminated water will end up in the landfill instead. Well, it will probably end up in a landfill, but someone else's landfill with the carbon that we're creating, contaminated carbon.
Also going back to just opening the floodgates and draining Woods Pond, that also raises a lot of risk of further contamination downriver. Right now, the majority of the contamination is being contained by the impoundments through Reach 8. We know that. We've taken a lot of sediment samples. We have a lot more samples to be collected. By just opening the gate and flushing all of that water, we're now risking the migration of contaminated PCBs even further downstream. And that's, we don't want to take that risk.
You wouldn't open the gates and let it go. It would be done over a period of time, and then you let this material sit over the winter and it hardens up. And you just take it out like as we were digging with a backhoe. Now, I'm not saying that this is, you know, I've never gotten precise measurements of the amount of water that would be let go, but when you have something like this project designed, don't you send it out to Arcadis?
Oh yeah, we have, GE has raised issues that you're raising too, like what is the best way we've had lots of discussions about what is the best way to remove this stuff. We actually pushed for, and the hydraulic dredging just isn't gonna happen just in Woods Pond, it's gonna be upstream of Woods Pond too for a distance. And we were the ones that were pushing for the hydraulic dredging because we've done it before. We did it at New Bedford Harbor and it worked perfectly there. Even though there's a lot of water, we're treating the water and it costs money to treat water, GE's money. In New Bedford Harbor's case, it was EPA's money. But it works great because it's a tried and true methodology, you know. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying there are other concerns too.
Okay, no.
Me, I would send it out to Arcadis and get
He's next.
an estimate of the work that way. That's how I look at it, but I'm just trying to
GE could come to us and say that at some point. Then But if we do that, then we're gonna have to bring trucks back on the roads, right?
No, you just put it in the rail.
Well, the rail's not going up to the landfill, though. The rail is going right next door to the wood spot, and then trucks will bring it up to the landfill.
Okay.
Well,
All right, I want everybody to have a chance to express themselves and ask questions. Gordon, you're.
sure, just have a question for the attorney. You mentioned a $150 million bond.
Correct.
Is that a cash bond?
Um,
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, yeah. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
On that.
Because if not, can we know who the bondholder is and what
Yeah,
company?
yeah, we
We've been
have-
burned before by a bond company in freaking Caymans or something, you
Yeah.
know, where everything fell through and nothing was covered. There was nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure EPA's done their homework.
No,
It's just- it would be nice,
I just saw that, I have the bond, copy of
Yeah.
the bond on my computer. I know it's for 150 million.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's a cash bond or performance bond.
Okay. It would just be interesting to know for our peace of mind. I know some companies aren't around in 25 years or whatever if they default, or in 10 years. So it'd just be interesting to know that particular aspect. I got nothing else about that, just I'd like to know.
Sure, we'll get back to you.
Thank you so much.
Sean?
I think it's comforting to know how, it seems like intensive the oversight's gonna be. And I'm wondering if you guys could speak a little bit more for maybe, I don't know, people that, we kind of know what you're talking about, but specifically with like volatilization into the air, or what's gonna potentially create a situation that's like gonna put, more contamination, the community at risk, those sorts of things. I know that one idea is that, you build a lot of the dump and then you cap it so that stops volatilization. I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about like your role in making sure, those checks and balances. Does that make it kind of?
Yeah,
I mean, there's gonna be significant air monitoring. That's gonna be and there will be performance standards, right, Josh, related to the air monitoring. That's gonna be the first line of defense, I think, but.
Yeah, so we do have the quality of life compliance plan that GE has to follow. So what I'm showing on the screen right now, this is from the Upland Disposal Facility Construction SIP. So this isn't dealing with PCB contaminated materials. This is just for the construction of the UDF. So what I have pointed to are a bunch of blue dots. Each of those areas are where you're gonna have a noise and air monitoring location while construction's going. So again, this is looking more at the particulates, not the PCBs at this stage.
Because there's no contaminated material being
Right.
moved around
Right now,
It's
yeah.
just earthwork moving.
You're getting background baseline, right?
Yeah, so at the very top here, sorry.
Where the river is, goes orange.
So yeah, the river is south on the
I'm
image.
just looking on the
It's
plan.
below the,
It's-
it's below the screen.
So that ridge line is.
Yeah, so the river is this way,
All right,
down towards the bottom of the page.
Right.
thank you.
So we have those there. When it comes to environmental monitoring, EPA, through our contractor, we do have them do QA/QC samples. So we'll take our own split samples that will be co-located with the work that GE's doing so that we can compare our laboratory results with theirs. And that's not just for air, that's also for groundwater monitoring we do. We did it for surface water, we've done it for sediment. We do extensive QA/QC work just to confirm that the material, their results are consistent.
If I can add, Sean, so when, there's notification levels associated with the air monitoring, and they're very conservative, like, as in, it's not risk, like, it's not, oh my goodness.
It's gonna go off for its risk to people's health.
Way, but what happens is that GE has to let us know, and in some cases, like, stop working, and it's on them to identify why this is happening and how to make it stop.
Okay.
Like, so it never really gets to proceed. It's not, they need to figure out why, because otherwise they're, sitting
Down
there
there.
paying contractors and twiddling their thumbs, so.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
typically we hear that we're not, the PCB sampling is too slow. The benefit of doing particulate monitoring is we know PCBs absorb to particulates a lot more frequently. Yes, PCBs do volatilize as well, but you're likely going to have the higher concentration of any PCBs in that particulate. So by at least having the particulate monitoring, and if we know that's higher or it's achieving those notification or action levels, that is the first step that we can, and then also do PCB sampling for air monitoring that will tell us the concentration of total PCBs, which would be inclusive of particulate along with vapor as well.
In addition, that in our response to comments in 2020, we detailed some of the past air sampling results we have in our work at the GE plant in Pittsfield, in the mile and a half, where there are many, where the PCB concentrations were higher. And I believe that the air sampling work did not find any exceedances.
I can say that that's accurate and true. I mean, I speak to the city of Pittsfield, about once a year. I'll be doing it again in a few months, just to give them updates on all the air monitoring. And I bring a timeline that shows, it's gonna be like going back like 20 years, and the levels are all very low, and the levels in the material were much higher. So, but that doesn't mean we don't, we still check, and there's always tomorrow, and past whatever doesn't indicate, so. Sorry, go ahead.
So when you're doing the air monitoring and when you're on site, when they're welding the seams, how often are you reporting so that the public can see, what the results are? Especially since if you're on site every day for 8 hours a day, it's going to be a lot of data, a lot of information. Is it going to be more frequent reporting for the public during that time?
Yeah, so for the quality of life parameters, GE on their webpage, they're posting that data as quick as possible. That, of course, has to be validated and confirmed. That is posted on their website, and I believe they show a 7-day rolling time period. In addition to that, they submit to EPA monthly their results from the quality of life monitoring that they've done. And EPA is making all of those reports we receive available on our webpage.
And then when you're on site observing the welding and the welding of the seams and actual construction, is that also just going to be weekly reports or?
So the way that usually, Olivia's going to be working on sort of for public consumption, a fact sheet that will be periodic, but it'll be like updates, and it's going to be the frequency we're still trying to home in on, and it's going to be based on how much work is, what's changing in this, and that, and the other. But things like that, there's going to be a lot of what we call construction quality management reporting, and there's going to be, our people will be doing oversight reports. GE's going to have oversight people doing their daily reports, so there's going to be reports every day, and what we're going to do, Olivia's going to do, is distill, with the technical team, kind of like how to put synopses together for this.
Highlight basically the most important information that the community would likely be concerned about into a more accessible, readable document. And I'll be working with the entire case team to make sure we're highlighting the significant work in a timely fashion.
And when we meet with Chris every other week, that's something we can share. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but I'm sure there'll be more discussions about what's going on at the site and the results of different tests and such that we can share through him to all of you. In addition, I mentioned about like citizen or community oversight as well. When things begin and start up, we are planning on having site tours and bringing groups like the PCB Advisory Committee to be able to observe the fusing and the construction of the UDF. So that's something we've already told GE that they're going to have to be ready for, is that there will be frequent tours and activities going on. We've already heard requests from our congressional representatives that they have interest in coming to see the site as work begins. So we're going to be doing everything we can to keep the communities involved, especially as we move forward with the construction this spring.
Yeah, and we're putting together this fact sheet thing, if there's things that people like, I don't care about that, we can remove, in other words, feedback will be good. We'd like to see more of this or less of that. And, yep, Gail?
It's Gail. Go ahead.
Sorry. I would like to say that I would like this to be investigated because I'm not 100% sure this theory is correct, but I live not far from the river, and I've experienced several times over the summer that the air quality would be really bad. And I was being told that it happens when the asphalt plant, which is right at the
I know where it
bottom,
is, yep.
okay, certain weather conditions, the air would wasn't going up into the air, it would be concentrated, a denser air. So the air quality was coming down the river and spreading out across the floodplain, I would call it. I don't live in the floodplain, I'm outside of it, but I was experiencing really bad odor from this asphalt plant. And I'm being told by the fire chief that it's from the asphalt plant, certain conditions. And it killed, I have a field of mint. It just shriveled up and died. My garden plants were affected. And so I'm concerned that during certain kind of weather conditions, that these volatilization that may be happening is going to be carried down the stream into the town. It's not far from our town. And I'm not the only one that's surely being affected. I would just go inside my house, but, you know.
But we're gonna have air monitoring data right there.
So how are you going to monitor something like that?
The volatilization of PCBs is so small, especially as you're talking about, you know, the asphalt material. And we've had problems at other sites with things like fuels and things and having it sink down into a valley or a river or something. So I understand exactly what you're talking about. But PCBs don't really volatilize much at all. My only point earlier was that people had come to us worried about volatilization, and the more we open up Woods Pond, the more that's going to happen, was my only point. But it's still, even that wouldn't probably trigger our air monitors. It just doesn't volatilize that much.
So is there any way to have an air monitor available during those conditions to check, see what's going on?
I mean, if you had an air monitor at the asphalt batching plant, it would be going through the roof, right? So we're gonna have an air monitor right at where the work is actually happening, which is gonna be the highest level you're ever gonna get.
Is there a way to describe these conditions to, you know, us?
I'm sure it will happen again this
Yeah,
summer.
No, but I mean,
That should
in a predictive way, I'm just, you know,
Yeah,
it's something that we could.
You know, I mean,
I will say that our air monitors that have been used at different areas of the site, and especially when we're doing
Yeah,
some
but that's
building
recording what's
12
happening.
demolition, when we were being affected by the forest fires in Canada, a lot of our meters were actually going off at Silver Lake in that area because the particulates that were being kicked up from that had nothing to do with the work we were doing, but they were being affected elsewhere. Well, that doesn't stop us from doing the work. GE still has to investigate and identify what is causing those issues. So if we are seeing other effects from outside of the property, it's not something they can say, oh, we don't need to worry about that, that's that. They need to demonstrate that that's what is actually causing that issue. If that means they have to adjust the location of the air monitor slightly to see if it is proximity to a different area. For instance, one noise location, we had one close to notification level noise exceedance during the site prep work. Well, we found out that the neighboring campground was creating boards and planks right next to one of our noise monitors, and it had nothing to do with the fencing work that was going on at the EDF property. So just because there's an exceedance and we see other work, GE still has to demonstrate what is causing those problems.
Yeah, we've had a leaf blower all of a sudden cause a particulate spike. The wildfires was a serious problem, in case anybody was wondering the impact of those
I was aware of
wildfires.
the wildfire.
Yeah. But it was triggering all the air monitors
Yeah.
that we
But
had
what I'm
to
saying
work.
is this, I'm more concerned about the volatilization of the PCBs coming and, you know, being included with whatever the asphalt plant may be contributing to the air. I know that there was bad air quality, but it wasn't, you know, being flagged as that when I was addressing it to the townspeople. And just, you know, I mean, I contacted Chris Britton and the fire chief and he, you know, I mean, it was all through the town and.
It was a petroleum smell, which is why
Yeah.
the fire chief
Yeah.
got.
No, I'm familiar with what that
Smells
is.
Nauseating, yeah.
Just like thinking if I, you know, if it has those
I got
kind of conditions.
Bob is next, and
Then, and there's work being done, you know, the PCBs could be in that air as well. And that's,
So the question being about the timing of air quality monitoring to maybe try to attempt to hit those climatic
get
conditions.
those kind of climate conditions,
Yeah.
not, you know, get the bright sun.
No, I
shining everywhere,
understand.
everything's
You know,
just
we'd have to kind of figure out if that's something that could be predicted, and then we could,
You can smell that here at town hall when that happened. There's a few times I'm like, oh, we paving roads today, and it was, but, I mean, I'm happy to look and see when those times are, if that's helpful, you know.
Yeah, and if we could get some kind of monitoring going on with that, that would be really helpful.
I mean, I know they have to do prep work to be ready, but that's something I could discuss with them, as in, you know, make sure you have enough equipment that the timing of this, within whatever time window that they have for sampling.
And if Chris would have access to quick contact with EPA, GE, or whatever.
He can call Josh or me anytime he wants.
We
Yeah.
meet every 2 weeks, so
Yeah.
it's.
Well, it
Open
can be a day
communication.
by day. I mean, I know, you know, I just go out, I want to go out in my yard and smell clean
Chris
air.
can call me or Josh any day. I think we've
And
established.
Gail, if anything were to come up, and we also have the R1 Housatonic email inbox, that's open for more than just public input and comment. If there's something somebody's seeing and you're hearing a resident that has concerns, they're allowed, and we encourage reaching out to that. That's managed by the entire case team, including myself and Olivia. It's a resource we implemented so that nobody's complaints or concerns or comments were lost in somebody's inbox when somebody might be on vacation, so.
So somebody will be there between 6 and like 9 or 10, because that's usually enough.
I start work at 6 a.m., so.
okay, Dr. Westmeising?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I've been questioned about is the acceptance criteria methodology. It was a big part of the remodeling of the agreement that resulted in Lee getting a dump, having the dump, right? Originally, it was all gonna go off-site, and then GE appealed that, and now we have a dump. One of the key components was that it was gonna be a low-level dump. I think it's 50 parts per million maximum in the dump here, and higher contaminated levels of sludge and are moved out, right? Is that fair to say? There's a
Yeah.
So,
50 parts per million here,
On average.
on average.
so the max, oh, sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, yeah, it's more confusing than
Yeah.
I
Well,
would
that's
like it
part
to
of
be.
why I'm bringing
Yeah,
it up,
so
because it is really confusing.
Yeah, so you have two different kind of buckets of the acceptance criteria. You have the sediment, and then you have the floodplain soils. So any sediments that are being brought to the UDF have to average less than 25 parts per million by reach. So it's not the entire river, it's by reach. So less than 25% or 25 parts per million in reach 6, in 5A, in 5B, in 5C. So that is one criteria. Then you have the criteria of floodplain soils, where it is an average less than 50 parts per million. So that's where the confusion
So
is.
floodplain soils are defined in a certain way, probably just above the shoreline kind of thing, or
Exactly.
something like that.
Yeah.
There's some geometric way to do that.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And most of the material will be sediment, so most of the material will be having to abide by the 25. Josh, that's correct, right?
Yeah, so sediment has to hit the 25, so I'm now showing two reaches. So on the left, you have a sub-reach of reach 5A, so this is just a small portion. And then on the right, you have Woods
I
Pond.
saw that in the things that Chris sent out
Yeah.
yesterday. or did.
So these polygons that are created are based off of an average and depth of sediment sampling that has been conducted. That is both historical soils, sediment sampling, in addition to sediment sampling that was conducted during the pre-design investigation.
Okay.
We're still doing a lot of pre-design investigation work for other areas of the reaches. 5A and 6 are the furthest in their design process, so these are the two I can talk about right now, but as we get more information, we'll have more information to be able to share on the specifics. The easiest way to look at this is the color that's closest to red are the higher concentrations, and the colors closest to blue are the lowest. Based off of this information here, in the conceptual design plan, based off of the Reach 6 sediments, the average of all sediment from Reach 6 is going to be 3.5 parts per million. Much lower than 25 parts per million. And
It's lower than what we anticipated too,
and it's also going to be roughly half of all the sediment that's going to be put into the UDF. So we're already starting at a very low rate.
What's the number again?
3.5 parts per million.
So we, just for reference, if we're doing a cleanup on a regular property, and it's a recreational property, not a residential property, but a recreational property, our cleanup level would likely be around 10 parts per million. So we're already below levels that we would say are okay, not landfill, in a recreational property.
Okay. So I just.
Which, that's important, that's a big change from what we kind of anticipated. Part of the reason is in my view, there are a couple of reasons. One is that the water continuing to move through these sediments, which is why we've been saying we need to clean them up sooner rather than later. Two is that we've cleaned up the source in Pittsfield. I mean, when I was first up there, there was oil bubbling out of the bottom of the river and moving its way downstream. It was awful, so all that has stopped over the last 15 years or so. So there's clean sediment coming down now too. It would take 100 years or more probably before it covered up everything, but that's part. So the good news is that the levels that we're putting in the UDF are way lower than we thought they were going to be.
You triggered a couple of other questions, but one of the things that sometimes people are under the impression of is that sediment is going to be tested as it comes out. And if it's greater than a certain amount, it goes out of town. If it's under threshold, it can stay in the dump in Lee, in the UDF in Lee. That is, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that is not the case. This is sampling all based on pre-established levels that have been measured both in the past and maybe some new ones. You thought there might be some new ones.
Yeah, so
it's all new now,
and it's
right?
by way of a map that you will be determining.
It's a combination of modeling and using historical and current data.
Right.
So I don't want to belittle the current data. In certain areas, we're collecting hundreds and hundreds of samples, some in thousands. For 5B and C right now, the PDI work plan proposed close to 20,000 samples to be collected from both of those sub-reaches. So that's a significant amount of data that we'll have to be able to work with in classifying.
So
there is
I'm assuming then that those samples are done in a way that very precisely marks their location.
Yes.
And in that way, when the construction and the chaos of construction, and then I can just picture this big giant sucky tookie thing, it's geolocating precisely.
Yeah.
So that you're on the edge of that red zone, you're there, you're not going to be.
There's typically GPS right on equipment that's used in these things.
And so it's this historical and potentially new data, all geolocated, that's telling you in a 3D kind of map-ish sort of way, where what mud is the highest, that goes out, right? So you already know have a good idea on some reaches, this red, reach 5A, you know that red's maybe going out of town.
Right, in
So-
5A, it makes it a little easier, it's not the big sucky thing,
Right.
because we're gonna be using excavators there, right? 'Cause
Okay.
that's
Well,
a different stretch of the river, you know what I mean?
It's a lot easier in the river because we have the river mileage we can work off of for
Okay.
stations. In Woods Pond, there's gonna have to be a very detailed explanation of how they're going to identify those areas. That being said, all of the material in Woods Pond, because it is at that 3.5 parts per million level, again, below the 25 parts per million, that's all slated to go to the UDF. So that material specifically. And Valley Mill,
Clarification, so just to, while we're on this, my understanding, because a lot of the big concern, a lot of people says, well, geez, if it's an average, can we put 1,000 parts per million in one load and 1 part per million in another, and by the time it's all done, but my understanding, I just want to make sure it's correct, is if a particular polygon has over 100 parts per million, that does not get mixed in, right, with the UDF, that automatically
Right.
goes out, so nothing over 100.
there is an off-site disposal criteria that is based off of a vertical core. So the average of that vertical core, if it is 100 parts per million or greater, that is automatically slated to go off-site. So that can't be moved.
How deep is a vertical core? From where are you testing? I don't.
It depends on the
Detail.
Right, it
Depends on the reach.
It depends on the reach,
Yeah.
it depends on the location, it depends on refusal of the material. There's a lot of performance criteria. For reach 6, the way it was done is because of the settlement agreement, we have agreed and instructed GE to practically create a new bowl of a pond by excavating everything 6 feet below the top of Woods Pond spillway. So that's a lot easier criteria to manage. So when GE went to go do that work, they were required to do a 10-foot core. So it's encompassing that entire 6 feet, but also below to determine what is below that, the 6 feet that will, below the area of what will be removed.
Okay. That makes some sense, and that's, as I've understood it and tried to explain it, I think the misconception is that it's gonna be, like monitored as it goes. You have a little meter on the end of the big hose, and it's just gonna say, oh, it's a little higher there, aim the output to the, to the train that's going west, and then, oh no, this is low level, put it in Lee. It's not, it's gonna be by geolocation.
Yeah, so GE is spending a lot of time and effort in determining and characterizing the current sediment in place
Okay.
to evaluate where it can be disposed of. And each of the conceptual designs, these are just estimate or preliminary numbers. So the tables Chris probably shared with you, those aren't the final numbers. Those final numbers will come in the final design plans. So for Reach 5A, that's going to be the end of April. And then for Reach 6, more towards the end of this year.
Okay, now, Brian mentioned something, and it was also mentioned earlier that when new information comes in, that will, and John, you mentioned, kind of like tailed on this, when new information comes in, that can modify the plans. Brian, you mentioned that in some projects, 10 parts per million was acceptable for recreational areas. In this sense, and yet some areas here are at 3.5 parts per million. Why bother?
Residential is generally 1, 2, just to show
ecology,
you.
that dramatically beautiful wild space,
Yeah,
right?
so I can speak to that.
Because that's hard to, that made me a little emotional. Got me a
No, it's
little
another
emotional.
question that's going around town.
No, I completely understand.
Why bother?
So if looking at the map, you see a lot of yellow and you see quite a bit of green, orange, and one little small speck of red. The real reason all of this work is occurring is because of the human health risk of the consumption of biota. So fish tissue, and waterfowl. Fish specifically are bottom dwellers specifically, the ones that are in the sediment are consuming these PCBs and they're bioaccumulating in the fish. Those fish can then be caught and consumed by humans, other ecology, causing it to magnify up the food chain. That is one of the major draws as to why this work has to move forward. Because if we leave it like this, it's still acting, first of all, it's not removed from those fish. It's going to continue to be an issue for those fish. But it's also uncontained. I know we often talk about the UDF in Lee being this landfill. Well, the river is a landfill. It's an uncontrolled flowing landfill of PCBs that are going all the way to Long Island Sound. The only way that's going to get taken care of right now, and the agency believes is the best remedy for it, is to remove those sediments and contain them on site, and the high level stuff being moved off site. That's where we're at right now. Through the settlement agreement, EPA has agreed to evaluate alternative, innovative technologies to help enhance the UDF. I provided a little bit of information in the letter specifically talking about the challenge. There was one that was identified as a notable solution. That technology, unfortunately, is more in theoretical stage. However, we have been in communication with a private company about using bioenhancement with activated carbon as a potential to enhance the UDF. So EPA is still very early in those evaluations for the UDF enhancement, but as we get more information, we're more likely, as we continue our review, we'll be having more discussions and sharing more information.
Yeah, Bob asked as a ground rule that we not argue, going ahead with the project or not, that we were more interested today in this meeting. And I know a lot has been discussed along those lines, but I bring up that point of why bother the 3.5 versus the 10 for recreation in light of that point of new information. And that new information, you brought up might be in some sort of bioremediation, et cetera. But it's also a little frustrating, though, to hear that the main reason is so people don't eat the fish. And because of the bioaccumulation and the escalation as things go up the food chain. Because, I don't know. Anyway, I think that the risk of that, I was a physician in town, retired now, but for almost 40 years, I have never seen anybody sick from eating the fish. Now, you might say, well, it's a population effect, and I know a lot about the epidemiology, not everything, but this is it's a balancing act, and it seems like the only, and you guys brought it up about the project or not, and the merits of it. And if it's truly 3.5 versus 10, and really about the fish, to me, that's new information that should...
So
it's not new, though.
The 3.5 is in every location. What's exposed, and that's what I'm trying to show here, is it's not 3.5 throughout the entire pond. It's 3.5 when you take all of the material that's going to be disposed of in the UDF.
So
that is
including the material that we're taking out because we have to remove 6 feet in certain locations.
Yeah.
It may not all be contaminated. Frankly, I think it's good news. You're turning it the other way. GE made that argument for 25, 30 years. Why are you even doing this? And I think the river, and I agree with you, it's such a beautiful place, and I think the river is never going to be what it can be unless we do this cleanup. And people are never going to be able to eat the fish. Fish are very, very high levels in the fish, very high levels in waterfowl. There are no mink in that section of the Housatonic. There should be mink there. We never found them. So there are lots of things going on in the ecosystem. Some people argue you should never do cleanups for ecological reasons, and I understand that too, but I just think there are pretty significant risks out there from consumption. There are also risks in the floodplain associated with direct contact too, and stuff, You could argue that there's some risk in the sediments too, but it's marginal risk in the sediments in terms of direct contact with people wading and all that. But I think the river is gonna be like something that people are gonna really turn to at some point when it is cleaned up. And as you see, Reach 5A, there's some pretty high levels up there, you know?
Robert?
It's good fly fishing.
Yeah, you'll be fly fishing and eating the fish downstream in Stockbridge a lot faster because of this cleanup.
I understand that. I have just like 3 quick technical questions. How big is the polygon? Do they vary in size?
They vary in size.
Depending on the
How many
quality?
sample resolution you have.
The
Like,
more samples we take, the smaller the polygon.
right, that's the method that they used at all the plant areas, soil removal. They've been doing that methodology I've been on the project for 20 years, so I've seen my share of Tyson polygons stuck together, and the more you put in there, the more you carve it up, and it leads to volume weighting of the sampling in a place that wasn't obvious.
It is not an poorly understood situation. I get that. It's a very intensively studied piece of the earth. Technical question about the liner and the dump. What's the difference between what's being built and a federally licensed facility for toxic materials?
So from
the engineering point of view, is there a significant difference?
There's different kinds of federal licensing that occurs, whether it's Tosca.
PCBs.
I was going to the Tosca.
This exceeds the requirements for Tosca landfill.
Tosca just says, well, I think at Tosca requirement, it just says 1 liner requirement and it says 2 liners.
Okay.
And the levels are below, I think, what would go into
For
a
reference.
Tosca. Right, so therefore, the requirements are greater and the levels are lower.
That's
I mean,
what I wanted.
my view, and you may not like this, but the risk from this material, once we're done, is gonna be practically non-existent. Right, I think that you can do whatever you want on top of that landfill. I know people don't wanna do anything on top of it now, but the risk, because of the levels and how it's being built and everything, it's almost non-existent, you know, from an engineering standpoint.
I understand. So in terms of the water, just dewatering is going to happen in the bathtub, the lined?
Yes.
Okay. How big is this?
Yeah, I was wondering
how
this
big is
earlier.
Josh, we don't know how the dewatering is gonna
They're
happen.
leaning that way, but it hasn't, the decision hasn't been absolutely made. They're still working through.
You might have to create another bathtub to do the dewatering.
Yeah, so you have to
I'm
pull the
sure.
water out and treat it and put it back in the river.
Yeah.
They'll likely end up having some type of storage system. I didn't include in these slides, I should have, the preliminary water treatment system. So there's gonna have to be some type of containerized. The dewatering is anticipated because it will be pumped directly into the geotubes. And so geotubes are a very fine mesh bag that once the sediment and the slurry is pumped into them, they can naturally dewater over time, and that water, as it seeps out, collects into an area which then can be sent for water treatment, which will initially be off-site, but a water treatment system will be constructed at the property specifically for dewatering.
Yeah, because to Dave's point, I mean, look, also leachate, I mean, 13 acres, 1 rainstorm of an inch, and you're dealing with hundreds of millions of gallons of water.
Yes.
It's a big bathtub.
Yes.
So this is all going to be sucked throughout the bottom, through the leachate system, and it's all contact water, it's going to have to be
So
treated.
it would be a separate system altogether. So you would have the leachate system, which would be constructed, but it would be a separate dewatering treatment system at the site to manage dewatering.
So
Okay,
if I can step in, it's not all going to be contact water because it's all not going to be open with consolidation happening throughout at the same time. So in their work plans, it's very much discusses like parsing out
There's
contact,
2 parts.
right, exactly, right.
It's still,
They'll be covering it too to keep the water out.
right, okay, no, this is the point, Carson, how big is the tank that they're gonna, for the leachate?
They're still
system?
working on the design, they're doing treatability studies right now
Okay.
with dewatering and wastewater treatment. And so we will see those kind of specifications when they're, when they actually do the design for this.
Right.
And it'll be following when we get to both sets of treatability studies, as in dewatering and wastewater treatment.
Right, okay.
And they dewatered some sediment, a significant chunk, in order to generate the water with which to do their treatability study for the wastewater treatment.
I'm sure you guys are aware, to Dave's point, it's a lot of water.
Oh, yeah.
So in my previous life before EPA, I was in the private industry, and one of the major projects I was on was in Virginia doing ash remediation. And my job was on site managing a team of 8 people sampling the water treatment system every hour for 24 hours. We would be filling million-gallon tanks. We had 4 on site, and those tanks would have to be sampled before discharge. So knowing the work I've done previously and the size and the amount of water we've managed and putting through these systems, it is doable. In this set. It's a lot. There's a lot of information we still have to be finalized. And I know one of the major concerns and complaints is we don't have all the answers in these documents. And that's us opening transparency for this work. In a lot of cases, these documents aren't shared with communities until you hit that final design stage. We've already gone through the conceptual. We've already gone through iterations of the design with GE before we open it up to the public for review. We've done the complete opposite at this site. Anytime we get a document, we make it available and we have public input periods. I know sometimes shorter than the large masses would like in some cases, but it's something we are committed and going to continue to do, is to make these documents available. And we'll continue to hold public meetings where we can.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Kat, did you have a question?
Nope, not at the moment. Hi, nice to meet you all. Sorry I couldn't be there this evening, but
No.
I think a lot of my questions were answered already. Just taking some notes, so I think one of my main questions, was around how the town of Lee and this committee would be made aware of different changes. I think in the SIP I was reading that, it's expected that the scope of activities and the sequence and schedule of activities may vary during construction, and that these variations will be discussed with EPA representatives on-site during routine project meetings. To the extent that these variations represent changes to the design, they will be approved by GE, and yada yada. My question, I guess, was going to be, what access will the town of Lee have to these changes, updates, and within what timeline, and how far from the original plan can these changes be made?
Hi, Kat. Just one thing I want to clarify, the changes of the plans aren't made by GE. EPA is the main decision maker, so any changes that are for a proposal, a design, any revisions, those all have to be approved by EPA before they're implemented.
Okay, I'm just reading what it says here, but
It could run
it
like,
does say GE, the engineer of record, and the EPA, but yeah.
it would just run such a large, sort of gamut, what you're talking about, that it's kind of, that's why we'll be at the very least, weekly status meetings on site, and there's been talk about, there's certain periods of time where it might have to be daily, and then there's daily construction quality management reports that come out every day, and to me, those are, not that they're gonna be sending them out all the time, but all of these things are sort of public, and, in what we are willing to approve and not. I mean, it's gonna depend on how, sort of, what the implications are in terms of meeting the performance standards. So it's too large a question to sort of give you a neat and clean answer, but that's why we're gonna be there all the time, when we need to, so to speak.
Okay.
Hopefully that kind of helps answer.
New to this project, so I can understand how it would be sort of a large scope question. And as I understand, things are evolving. Is that what you're saying?
Well, things are always evolving.
as things come
When you're
up?
on a construction project, especially one this big, I mean, things are always evolving just by the nature of its construction. So, you get new information.
We are.
Hopefully the new information isn't different than what we expect, but anything can happen, and that's why we're gonna be there. You know, that's what, anybody who's been involved with like a large construction project, challenges come up and then they get addressed.
That's, the changes I think, Rich, you're talking about are kind of the means and methods that GE is employing. And as I talked about earlier, the performance standards, that they're kind of the basic design requirements that GE has to meet that we've approved wouldn't change unless, you know, I don't see them changing unless we approve otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, if they had like a little, I don't know, I'm just thinking like something that has nothing to do with the actual performance of the landfill, but they had, you know, a certain size of gravel that they were gonna use under a road, and something, a batch came in, you know, 1/8 of an inch under or over. I mean, you know, I'm not saying we would approve it or not approve it, hopefully it was okay to, but something that literally has no implications, you know, we might be like, you know, that's okay, even though, you know, that's in something that's like, oh, this liner weld, it didn't work out or it didn't meet the test. It'd be like, nope, out, and you know, so it really depends on what the thing is that we're observing and what the implications are on meeting performance standards.
Yeah, in terms of adapting, we do have an adaptive management plan for the site, which practically requires GE to evaluate and continually adapt to ensure that the work's being conducted in a efficient and expeditious way to protect human health and the environment. Now, that being said, if there's something the agency identifies as a method that is more sound or better for the project as a whole, nothing stops the agency from having going to GE and bringing this information to them to implement for the project. So, for instance, if we're going back to the how are they geolocating and making sure the suction tube is hitting the correct areas and that material is going to the correct place. Well, if they're not adapting to come up with a better way to do that, the agency has full authority to go and say, well, we need to reevaluate this, and this method is going to be the better method for doing that work.
Okay, it's 7:30. Do you have time for one or two more questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Jones, if I may respond to Mr. Bailey's question about the bond.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, I have it on my computer.
Thank you.
It's a $150 million bond. It's a payment or performance bond issued by Zurich America, and we can get you a copy of it, PDF of it.
Thank you.
Mike, we can answer more questions.
Yeah, I just have one from, we understand how the process works, the oversight works. There was a question from the public about the wastewater treatment. Is it going to be like a standard wastewater treatment plant? Is it specifically just for PCBs? Or they're asking about whether it's going to be a Class 6 wastewater treatment plant, or is it something completely different?
So I'm not familiar with the term Class 6.
Right.
And I've looked at conceptual designs for it. I would call it, to me, a standard wastewater treatment system. Precipitate some metals out, you throw some flock in to get things to fall out. You know, there's controlling pH and some carbon absorption to pull organics. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be some filters and filtration and so forth. Nothing unusual at all. Matter of fact, we could probably look at Building 68 up in Pittsfield, which is, they already operate. It's probably going to be not dissimilar from that. You know, so, and they have effluent limits that they have to test for and meet. That's why they're doing these treatability studies on the actual projected wastewater to make sure that they have the methods right before they, you know, then they'll scale it up for a design.
I will say too, in addition, we talked a lot about the water. Every gallon that has to be dealt with by GE is dollars for them. They're going to minimize, you know, how much water they have to put through that hydraulic dredging pipe in order to still make the stuff move so that they don't have to treat too much water because it's their expense, you know. And then the same thing with rainwater too. The more rainwater they can keep out of that area, the better off they're going to be.
Which goes to his point about the contact water. Like, they don't want to have to treat water that hasn't come, because it's just, it makes their process and their costs that much more.
We're not worried about them proposing proposing on how to do that in a less expensive way, which is, don't have as much water in the first place.
Yeah. So it's almost drinking water that's going to be coming out of there.
I wouldn't, we're basing the levels off of the Clean Water Act levels, but NIPD's discharges are not necessarily the same levels as what would be in, like a drinking water.
Quality criteria as opposed to drinking water.
They're using carbon blocks and all that stuff.
Right. It's a similar
It's gonna be
processes.
very clean, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I put up our rudimentary kind of flow chart for the water treatment that's in the proposed water treatment for it. This is still under a pilot study and isn't finalized by any means at this point. This is available on our website. It was one of the meeting materials. We had one of the boards that kind of just throws you through the full flow chart of it. So quickly, you have the sediments that are placed in the UDF that is collected by the UDF collection system. It then goes into an equalization tank, so you want to make sure that you have the flow going through the system at a constant rate to ensure that we're not trying to force too much pressure into the system. From there, you'll go into chemical treatment, so this could be the use of acids or soda bases to help neutralize, which can also help cause some of the materials to flock out and clean the material. That then goes to another equalization tank. And from there, we go to a multimedia filter, which then goes into more filtration bags, and then through granulated activated carbon trains, which then is split between the solids and water. The water goes through further filtration, and then after sampling, it would be discharged back into the river, or Woods Pond, I think is what we have there. Yeah.
We're lucky to have a couple of water experts on our Superfund team there, so between Rich and Josh.
I can share this package also. It has a lot of the materials that were used at our open house that are available.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're being told that there's no PCBs in the aquifer, okay? That's underneath this, where this, the whole aquifer basically. And so one of the things I've been concerned about is with Woods Pond, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So I'm assuming that there was sediment in Woods Pond, and then GE came along and started throwing their oil into the river. So you have, some that went away downstream, and then you have sediment that's laden with PCBs. And then, like in the 70s or early 80s, when they stopped actually putting more oil into the system, the riverine system, you have less PCBs or maybe no PCBs, I don't know. When you take this hydraulic pump and you start pulling the sediments out, how will you know that you got to the point where you are, number one, where you've just got no PCBs or very few PCBs, and if you take away all the sediment, will the aquifer be jeopardized because now you've taken the sediment that grabs the PCBs and you might have a sand substrate or a bedrock or something else other than the sediment that's holding onto these PCBs. Has that been even considered in all this, with the pond?
Yeah, so we're not just going in and removing and then walking away. There is a set criteria for the amount of material that is removed from each of the reaches. Each reach is being treated as its own kind of cleanup area, so they each have their own final design. For Woods Pond specifically, we're again removing 6 feet below from the crest of Woods Pond Dam. So any material that remains there will remain, of course. But although they're removing 6 feet, they're actually going to have to remove additional amount or dredge additional amount for the installation of a chemical isolation layer and a cap that would provide both erosion protection in addition to habitat layers for that area. So it's not that we're just digging the hole and leaving it. We're also going to end up backfilling with a chemical isolation cap.
Which is basically sand. Sand with some carbon mixed in.
So if I could, to further what I think Gail's getting at, are there any wells in the area that are actually specifically for tapping into and checking the water level in the aquifer that would be separate from your other testing? In other words, to see if anything had penetrated into the aquifer that's underneath this area. I think that was your concern.
I'm worried about the aquifer.
Yeah, so that's all I'm checking. Are there wells, I think there may be wells existing that could be tapped into because of the testing that's been done before by either Short-Term Modui or the town of Lennox, or, so they have some that actually go all the way down into the aquifer below what you guys are dealing with. I didn't know if that was ever brought up to GE to just check. I'm just asking the question. I'm not.
Yeah, I understand.
That's all.
So in preparation of all of the UDF work and design work, there was extensive background sampling that had to be conducted.
Okay.
That involved groundwater sampling at the site. So we have the baseline conditions of the UDF property. As part of the operation and monitoring and maintenance of the UDF, during and after closure of the landfill, GE is required to monitor groundwater in that area, which is the aquifer you're talking
As
about.
long as we're down into the aquifer with the wells.
Yes. So on the figure I'm now showing, the blue arrow is the direction of groundwater flow. It's also pointing to the direction of the river. Sorry that we're not the correct orientation. But each of the red dots represents a different monitoring well location that will be used to monitor any impacts that in an unlikely situation would come from the UDF itself. So there's significant groundwater monitoring that's going to have to do, and that's going to be monitored for more than just PCBs. There's a whole group of analytes, which I believe we included in our response letter, that will be continually monitored at the UDF in perpetuity.
Thank you.
And I think too, though, if we put wells in the edge of Woods Pond, we would have PCBs in that aquifer now. We're not, where the UDF is, it's not right next to Woods Pond. So there would be PCBs because of the sediments that have PCBs in them. There would be PCBs in it. And once we take out those sediments, it actually is going to improve those wells if we have a well next to Woods Pond.
Well, it'd be nice to know.
Yeah.
If what you're saying is, true.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an engineering that, we take out the PCBs, there's going to be
I was
less
just
in the
more
water.
concerned that the clean sediment was going to be taken away and that is actually acting as a buffer or a
Yeah.
barrier to.
Yeah, like Josh said, we'll be putting clean sediment back in after we're done.
In addition to a chemical isolation layer, so it would prevent the migration of any materials that are capped in place from going up into the surface water.
In fact, one thing that we asked GE to do is clean up Woods Pond sooner rather than later to try to increase the speed with which the whole project can get done, so we're not in everyone's hair for 15 years. And by doing that, though, we got to make sure that there's not contaminated. When we start working upstream after we get done with Woods Pond, something's going to have to be done with Woods Pond before we finish. Like after we get the upstream stuff done, we have to make sure that there's no recontamination of Woods Pond, and then we would never put in that final layer until we were done with all the upstream stuff. But Josh has been working really hard with GE to speed up the remediation and do Woods Pond at the same time we're doing Reach 5A, which is going to speed it up by a lot.
And we further actually challenged GE to look at the sequencing of the entire project and look at ways to speed that up even further besides just doing 5A and 6 at the same time. Besides the work and the construction that's going to affect the communities, we understand that there's other effects. Berkshire Scenic Rail, we're working with them. Well, as long as this project's going and the landfill is operating, we're affecting their business. So the sooner we can get this work done, it also allows them to continue their regular work. In addition to recreation, we understand that a lot of people love kayaking, walking around Woods Pond, enjoying that area. We don't want to take that away. We are working very closely with DFW at looking at ways to make sure that we can still provide those activities where we can when the project's going, knowing that for the protection of safety, that we close certain areas off. But that's all different, all stuff that we are evaluating, and GE's website will include a schedule of work, which will identify different areas that are being worked on and any restrictions to the use of those areas.
And that allows us to close the UDF faster too, right? We can cap it earlier, and especially if we do half and half, we could have all of Woods Pond capped in less than 5 years, you know? I mean, that's all. I mean, not Woods Pond capped, the UDF material that comes from Woods Pond.
Dave, and then this will be the last
About the
question.
performance bond, so, let's say 20 years after the dump is completed, there's a problem with the liner and it makes a big mess to clean up. Does the performance bond cover that, or who pays for that?
That's his question.
And how long is that good for? And is it good for 100 years?
I'd have to take a look at the specifics, Mr. Carrington, yeah.
We probably have to, I think there are times when we reduce those bonds, depending on how much work is left. So, you know, we may keep the bond, a certain amount of the bond available in case something goes wrong. I don't know how we do that.
So I'd have to look into it and get back to you. I imagine that it lasts for the extent of the work, GE's obligations, but I don't wanna.
What I'm talking about is 50 years from now, after everything is, I mean, the liner is expected to fail after the half-life of the PCB, so sooner or later, something is going to have to be done.
Yeah, so.
Agreed?
That's a technical question. We got
an attorney's answer.
I will make sure.
Maybe.
What is the liners go for 300 years or something? Is that what it is?
Yeah, 300 to 400 is. We addressed that in our letter.
Josh is working on the PCB amendments. We got all kinds of stuff going that you may see things be a lot different in those sediments.
To get to the heart of your question, like I know there's been a lot of concerns about, well, is the warranty voided if it's used in this type of landfill? Is what happens if something we observe contaminants coming from the UDF? And GE's on the line for all of that. It's not again, they close the landfill and they're done. They're responsible for the operation and monitoring and maintenance, not just in the short term, but in the long term for this property. So if something does happen, that would result in needing corrective action. And again, we don't anticipate this.
Well, that's forever, but whether GE has the money at some point 50 years, I get your question.
The consent decree agreement has no termination date, so GE's obligations last in perpetuity.
So if the UDF has a landslide, they're held responsible.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a lot to think about. I'm sure the PCB committee is going to be meeting again, and this meeting will be the main topic of conversation. Josh, I know you've said that you and/or your group would be willing to come back at some point if we have more questions. This has been very, very helpful. Thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We know more than when we walk through the door. Hopefully the same goes for you. So I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting for this evening.
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.